Well, good morning, Crossroads. Again, it is a privilege to get to be here with you today and get another opportunity to talk to you about walking in the footsteps of God, moving towards His character and His heart and His goodness in my daily life and in my daily activity. Um, so, if you've been following along with Kevin and with Angie, we're continuing into kind of processing 1 Corinthians 13. Love is patient, love is kind, it does not envy. So this idea that God does not envy, that the character of God is absent and void of envy. It doesn't exist in him. And I have to agree with Kevin, but for a little different reason, that envy is a tough one. Envy to me is not a tough one because of dealing with God, because that's not what I'm dealing with today. But envy is tough because envy is kind of what I call in youth ministry world a don't action, right? So if somebody says don't envy, well, that didn't really tell me how to get there. It just tells me what not to do, right? And so often in youth ministry, I try to not give our kids don't actions. I try to give them do activities, right? So I want you to do this. I want you to go be this. And by telling them what you want them to be and what you want them to do, you've actually told them also um, what not to be doing, right? Because if they're doing what you sent them to do, then they won't be doing those other things. And so I often try to, with don't actions, I try to think about them from more of a formation setting, right? Because here's the thing about a don't action. Sometimes they're necessary. Sometimes I want Johnny to not cross the street without looking. So I say, don't cross the street without looking. Sometimes I want little Johnny to not lick the light socket. So I say, don't lick the light socket, right? But the problem with don't actions is that they're powerful in the short term. Okay, Johnny, don't cross the street. Um, the problem is, though, in long-term formation, there's no motivation within a don't action, right? And so when you think about formation, it's often not enough just to tell people, don't do this or don't do that. We have to call them into something bigger and greater than themselves even, right? And so I want to actually look at that with you a little bit today and think about when it comes to envy, how is it that we could show up in the world that would kind of run counter to envy, being people who are envious and jealous and all those things. What is a way that God would have us show up in the world that would bring in things that are the opposite of envy and jealousy? So I want to take you to Romans chapter 12, verse 9 through 13. And I want you to just listen to the heart of God that Paul is trying to set up and get going here, okay? He says, love must be sincere, hate what is evil, cling to what is good. Be devoted to one another in brotherly love. Honor one another above yourselves. Never be lacking in zeal, but keep your spiritual fervor, serving the Lord. Be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, faithful in prayer. Share with God's people who are in need and practice hospitality. Now, first of all, it's really important to let you know that this is right before Romans 13. So it's right before the section that we're actually digging into, right? So Paul is doing something here, telling us about the heart of God, the character of God, the intent of God, and he's being very action-oriented. Listen to these words. He says, hate what is evil. He says, cling, right, to what is good. Be devoted to one another in brotherly love. Honor another above yourself. Never be lacking in zeal. Keep your spiritual fervor. Be joyful. Be patient. Share with God's people and practice hospitality. So he's giving these very action-oriented phrases that you and I don't have to sit around and go, man, I wonder what love looks like. I wonder what it looks like to be this kind of loving, generous community, right? He gives us very specific actions. And then he comes to this one. He says, bless those, verse 14, bless those who persecute you. Bless them and do not curse. Now, I don't know about you. In our language, I think, and in our culture, we kind of lose this idea of what a blessing is and what a curse is, right? But if you go to the Bible, it's pretty clear that curses are pretty nasty, mean things, and blessings are pretty wonderful, great things, right? And they have a tremendous impact on people and lives and families. And blessings, are asking God's goodness and power and faithfulness and provision to be over someone and be for someone and all those things. And so, as priest in the kingdom, one of the roles that we get to live into is to pronounce the blessing of God's goodness and presence for people and to people. God's goodness and love for people and for the world to break into their here and now, right? That's what a blessing is. And so what happens in this world that we live in? What happens if the people of God end up being a people who are asking God to bring the very best for everyone we come in contact with? What would happen if the people of God begin to be a people in our neighborhoods, in our workplaces, in our homes, in our church, on Facebook, Crossroads, right? What would happen if the church began to be a group of people that took every opportunity available to us to ask God to bring his goodness on everyone we come in contact with? I want you to think not only about what that creates in your world, in your workplace, on Facebook, social media, what it creates in your church or in your home, but I also want you to think about what it creates in you. When I start praying the very best for people, when I stop asking God to help me get even with so and so, or I stop asking God to deal with my enemy in a way that benefits me, and I begin to ask God to bless my enemy, to bless my neighbor, to bless the brother in Jesus that sees life and faith differently than me. I want you to think about what that begins to create in you and I as the people of God. And this envious nature, this jealous nature that love is not, begins to be obliterated before we ever even have to think about it. So the challenge this week, church, is for you to go and bless. I want you to think of yourself as an instrument of God's peace, and I want you to, everywhere you go, to find some way, big or small, it doesn't matter, to bring God's goodness, God's love, God's mercy, God's kindness into that situation in a way that it would have never showed up if you hadn't entered the room. All right, church, there's the challenge. There's God's word for the week. You are loved. You are appreciated. Keep being who you're being and doing what you're doing. God bless you, church. Have a great week.